Hey guys, what's up? Nick here once again, and today we're going to be talking about why Twisted Metal 2012 on the PlayStation 3 failed. I know a lot of this video is going to be pretty negative, or it's going to sound like I dislike this game, but that cannot be farther from the truth. And the main reason I say that at the beginning is because I know there's still a lot of fans for this game out there, which is amazing to see. And I know I've gotten some feedback on my tier list video for 2012, as well as some community posts from some people who are a part of a pretty big online group of guys who still play 2012 online to this day. We'll get more into that later, but I did want to say that I don't want to offend any of those guys. I don't want to make them seem like I hate this game or I know everything about it and they don't know anything. Because most of my replies, especially in the comment section, are usually satire or me just being straight up ironic in a lot of ways, and people don't catch on that, and I kind of feel bad sometimes because like, oh, well, I just come across as an asshole, but in reality, I'm just teasing. But that being said, when it comes to 2012, there's a lot of things you can say about this game that are really good, and there's a lot of things you can say that are pretty bad, but we're going to look strictly at the main reasons why I personally feel this game failed, and why it didn't take off like they thought it would, and essentially why this game just fell apart only after a couple months of its release. It's a very sad tale, and I really wish I wasn't having to make this video. I wish I could have made a video called Why Did 2012 Succeed? You know, I would have much rather been making that video, but here we are anyway. So I jotted down a ton of points as to why I think it failed, and then I also, of course, added a ton of points of why I think 2012 shouldn't have failed, and why I think it's still one of the best Twisted Metals in the series. So, starting out with my first point, the story mode only having 3 characters was a complete disappointment. And on top of that, they made the single player feel like it had much less content than the original titles. In reality, you could look at it as, well, they kind of conformed the single player element to be more for modern gaming. In the past, the way it worked is you would choose a random vehicle. Usually it was between like 8 and 12 characters on average within a game. You would pick one of them and you go through the main story, which essentially was just 8 levels, or give or take. And as long as you made it through the 8 levels, you could get all the way to the ending to see your cutscene, to see what your character wished for from the elusive Calypso. And that was the main story, it was just this one guy who was like a mystical being who can grant the winner of the contest one single wish. All they have to do is survive all the way to the end. Now, clearly, the story was never that deep. It was never in depth very much, and there wasn't a whole lot to the games. But if you think about it, it added a lot of gameplay because you'd have to go through the entire story mode with each vehicle to get their ending sequence, to see what happened, right? And if you had like 8 to 12 vehicles, that's 8 to 12 full playthroughs, each one ranging from 1 to 2 hours each. That's a lot of gameplay. Whereas in 2012, they decided to completely strip that away. Instead of having 8 to 12 endings with 8 to 12 characters, they only gave us 3 characters. The other biggest difference, of course, is that the vehicles essentially are more or less their own characters in this game. I've always felt in Twisted Metal the vehicles were just as much of the character as the person behind the wheel, and 2012 just cements that theory in the sense that the vehicle itself, they have a ton of them here. I want to say there's at least 13 or 14 vehicles to choose from out of the gate. And there is a couple unlockable ones throughout the story mode, which is really cool. And it gives you a reason to go back and play it. But again, we'll get into that in a little bit. And with the vehicles at hand, they did a pretty good roster, I gotta say. You know, I think there's a lot of variety within there. And they did a good job with that. But still, it just feels really wrong when you look at it in the sense of Sweet Tooth is now behind the wheel of Axel, which is, in my opinion, just a straight up sin. I don't know why they did that. You can play between 4 different factions, so basically 4 different characters, even though there's only 3 characters in the main story. You can play as the Holy Men, you can play as Sweet Tooth's gang, Dollface, or as Mr. Grimm. And those are the 4 characters that you'll see in the vehicles. So it's really just a weird, like, it just feels wrong. That's the only way to describe it. Going from any Twisted Metal, especially if you're a fan of the series, to jump into 2012, just felt really weird. It felt really rushed, and it just didn't feel right. In reality, even first-time playthroughs, I think, it's only about a 5-hour story. So you can get through the entire single player in under 5 hours if you're decent at the game. And that's on normal difficulty. Of course, there is different difficulty settings that you can choose from, and I gotta say, there is quite the difference between them, especially if you play on the hardest difficulty, Twisted. At that point, though, it's just artificial difficulty in the sense that the cars are just insanely overpowered. They strictly only go after you, more than they normally do, and they are so aggressive that it just becomes very frustrating if you're not used to it. It's almost impossible at times as well, unless you choose specific characters and get really good with them. So yeah, at least they give you the difficulty options. It's not just a one-time, one type of gameplay style. There is different difficulty settings, so there is that. But moving away from the single player, obviously being a huge downside to the game, let's talk about the online servers at launch. If you guys were there on day one like I was, you know the pain of how bad the servers were. And not only that, but they were strictly based off the host. I don't remember what the name is for it, but essentially the server would connect to whoever hosted the server. And then if the host were to leave or get disconnected, instead of just having it reroute to a different person in the lobby, it would just kill the lobby for everybody and send everybody back to the main menu. This was obviously a huge hindrance because if the server itself didn't just go bad and kick everybody out, if somebody had to go somewhere, a lot of times that happens. If you just can't finish a match, you got to leave. And if you're the host, it's game over for everybody, which is just a huge bummer. And it was super annoying, and it happened almost every other game, at least in my experience. And that was if you were lucky enough to find a lobby in the first place. I remember for the first week or two this game was out, I would sit in a lobby for like maybe 30 minutes at the max, waiting for some type of lobby to pop up and populate. It was so weird because I thought at first, I'm like, is this game really that dead? Did like nobody buy it? When in reality, it actually didn't sell too terribly. It actually sold okay. And it's not that people weren't waiting for lobbies. It's just there were so many people and the servers just couldn't handle it. They weren't used to that. And there was no one there to really fix the servers at that time either. So it was just a huge shit fest from the beginning. And it made a lot of people, especially casual players who've never played Twisted Metal before, just completely leave the game. They went to GameStop and they sold it immediately because they either didn't care about single player to begin with, or they played the single player already, got bored with it, and they wanted to play against their friends in multiplayer. And obviously it was trash, so they decided not to deal with it. It was eventually fixed months down the road, but it was way too late. And it just, the servers completely died in numbers. I didn't even come back from what I remember. I think I gave up on the game myself. But there was times, down the road, I would come back from year to year and give it a shot again. But it got to a point where the only people that played it were these die-hard fans who were extremely try-hard, and it wasn't fun. There wasn't any skill-based matchmaking or anything. So you would just go into a match with like 6 people who would just dominate you every single time. And it just was, it wasn't fun. Another big issue I think with multiplayer is that there was just no real sense of progression. There was like a level system from what I remember. You could have like up to level 200, or maybe it was more than that. I don't really remember, but I do remember that in the sense of, yes, if you played matches, you got a certain amount of points towards your account, and once you joined a new lobby, it'd show what level you were, and you could show off in that way. But other than that, there really wasn't any sense of progression. Like there wasn't any like secret skins you could unlock for the vehicles for doing certain challenges like you got like in Call of Duty or Halo or whatever. So that was kind of a big bummer in my opinion. And that really stops a lot of casual players from ever returning to the game because there's no sense of progression. There's no reason for them to come back. And yes, there was trophies involved with playing online, but those were pretty easily obtained. If I remember right, I think I got all those trophies within like the first 2 days of playing online. So definitely not an excuse in my opinion to not include any type of progression. And kind of moving away from the multiplayer aspect of things, the biggest thing in my opinion that I think really killed the game, more than the story mode being kind of trash and more than the multiplayer launching with really terrible servers, I think the one biggest thing is that Sony made them release this game at the end of the PS3's life cycle. You could look at it like, yes, they had all of the time in the world at that point to utilize the entire PS3's architecture, and I really think they did because this game looks amazing, and we'll get to that later. But on the other hand, because it is the end of the life cycle and a new console's on the horizon, literally a year later, the PS4 launched. And as soon as the PS4 launched, you know damn well Sony's going to completely halt everything on the PS3 side in terms of like updating and supporting online servers and all that stuff. and they're going to work 100% towards new IPs and all the new stuff for the PS4 to sell more units. So it really was a bummer. I think if Sony would have let them wait another year, and even if, you know, I would have been patient, I think every Twisted Metal fan would agree with this, that we would have waited longer for a PS4 version of this game. And granted, they could have had it launch on both systems. They could have had it for PS4 and PS3. So it would have backwards compatibility, everyone would be happy, and they would sell more units. And I think it would have been a really good launch title for the PS4. I really do. And it also, of course, would have given them another year of time to really flush out the story mode to make it the way that they wanted to. So it's a real shame that it came out at the end of the PS3's life cycle, because it just lost all its luster, and it was just dropped dead by Sony within a month or two after its release. And it's just, yeah, it's just a really sad story. It's also kind of weird that this game has never been ported onto the PS4 or the PS5 for that matter. They've brought back the old games, you know, Twisted Metal 1 and 2 have been ported over multiple times, and even Twisted Metal Black has been ported onto the PS4, which is also playable on PS5. But for some weird reason, they just refuse to touch this game, and I don't understand why. I think if they brought this game back in some way, shape, or form, even if, of course, if they remastered it in some way, and they were able to relive or reopen the online servers to play on PS5, I think this game would do well today. I really do. Not to say that they would have to go through and, you know, recode it or anything, or add new characters to give it life. I think if they just brought back the servers the way they were, brought back, you know, the entire game the way it was, and just put it on new systems, I still think it would sell pretty well. I know a lot of Twisted Metal fans would jump on that bandwagon and play it. I know I would. So, yeah, it's just weird to this day. The only way to play this game is literally to buy a PS3. That's what I did. I had to go out of my way and get a used PS3 on eBay. So, it's just wild, man. It is wild that there's no other way to play this game to this day in 2023. Because even the emulation process is still pretty lackluster and doesn't work very good unless you have an insanely beefy PC. Another big thing I think that really hurt this game was the flying vehicles. They just felt super out of place, and they were forced upon you in the single player, which I absolutely hated. I think it's okay to have options, and I think it was creative to include a flying vehicle like Talon in Twisted Metal. But yeah, in my opinion, it just did not work out. I didn't like playing as them. They were too difficult for multiplayer, and they were just too boring in single player. I never really had an issue with them in single player. It's just they weren't fun to control. The controls just did not work for flying vehicles. And that goes for Sweet Tooth's mech as well. I absolutely hated playing as Sweet Tooth in this game because the mech controls and flying were just god-awful. So, yeah, I mean, you could look at it both ways. You could say it's unique, it's different, it added to the gameplay for multiplayer. But I would like to say it actually hindered the gameplay and probably turned a lot of people off. And I remember when the game was first out, Talon was actually so broken that he could just annihilate anybody in any game. So as soon as you saw somebody choose a flying character and they knew how to play as them, it was game over. Like, you had no chance. They did eventually nerf it, of course, but it took way too long, and that was another big reason why the game failed for the multiplayer aspect. So yeah, flying vehicles, just stay out of Twisted Metal. Don't ever bring them back. And another really big thing for me when it comes to the single player having some major issues is the boss battles. I know the boss battles are pretty infamous for being terrible in 2012 and why a lot of people refuse to go through the single player because of them. And I understand why, 1000%. They're just way too long. They're just infuriating. And it's not even like they're really that difficult, especially on normal. They're pretty easy, all three of them. But they're just tedious. They take way too long. And if you are doing it for the first time, it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of dying, rinse, and repeat, just like a Dark Souls game. And I can tell you straight up, most people who play Twisted Metal are not Dark Souls players. Like, obviously, there's probably a lot of you out there that play both, and that's awesome. But I'm not one of them, and I know a lot of my friends who are TM fans absolutely hated these boss battles because they didn't like that formula, and I'm right there with them. And the funny thing is on harder difficulties, it didn't make them any different. It just made them more frustrating because they just were way too over the top and way too long, and there was no checkpoints. So, yeah, apparently the funniest thing is it was all by design. Hear it from David Jaffe himself.
We really want that battle to be on the fast side. We're talking 35 minutes, but on the long side, it's like a freaking hour-long boss battle. I want it to be one of those battles that we never want you to get to the point where you throw your controller at the TV and have like a shelf moment. but we want those bosses to definitely be a situation where you're so freaking mad that you almost do it,
right,
and you go to bed pissed, and you wake up the next morning, and I love those where you wake up and you just get it instantly because you've slept on it. I want it to be one of those bosses that when you get it, just feels great to have taken her down.
That's awesome.
And so, and this is sort of her intro that we missed. So yeah, that's our...
Yeah, I can't believe he actually admitted that, but anyway. Another big thing to the single player, the race events. Yeah, why the fuck was racing ever put into Twisted Metal? I don't think I have to say anything more on that. They were just god-awful. There was too many weapons that involved charging up instead of including any actual differences between them or some type of skill gap. Like, there's the swarm missiles, the RC car bomb, the stalker missile, and I guess the sniper. They like, I'll give them some credit where credit is due for a little bit of creativity, like with the sniper rifle being the first time ever in Twisted Metal, which I did like for the most part in single player, but in multiplayer it was just stupid. And it's just like, there's no skill involved with it. It's just stay near somebody, holding down a button, waiting for a certain timer to go off and let go at the right time. There's no skill. There's too many weapons in the game that pretty much are the exact same formula. And it just becomes repetitive and doesn't really make you want to use certain missiles over the other like we got in the old games. And speaking of not enough variation, there is just not enough variation between the vehicles themselves. I don't know why, but Crimson Fury, Kamikaze, they're pretty much the same exact vehicle. I mean, just different names and a little bit different design around the body. But relatively the same stats, same special weapon, you name it. There's relatively no differences. Now, I know the diehards are going to be like, no, there's differences. Obviously, they're different. Yes, there is slight, minute differences. But I'm looking at this from a casual gamer who just jumps into this game for the first time. They're going to be like, why the fuck would I choose one or the other because of the same car? Why are there two different cars if they're the same? That goes as well for Meatwagon and Shadow. Yes, of course, I think these two have probably the most differences out of these examples, but it's still relatively, they feel the same while driving. They relatively have a special that kind of does the same thing, same amount of damage, you name it. Shadow obviously has more to them. There's a lot more stuff you can do with their special weapon that you can master and do a lot more damage with, and yada, yada, yada. But my point still stands. Death Warrant and Roadkill, same thing again. You put these cars next to each other, the only difference is their paint job. The special weapon feels and looks the exact same. They feel the same while driving. They're the same car. And then I would even argue Darkseid and Juggernaut have a little bit too many similarities. Obviously, Juggernaut's a little bit too big to be considered the same as Darkseid. He has the giant trailer, but they both have the mine special weapon. I don't know why they gave that to Darkseid. He already had two different special weapons, and they both have insane ram damage, and they're both a semi. So, yeah, it's just too many similarities. It's just, I wish there would have been more creativity. I wish they would have brought like Twister and Crazy 8 and now maybe a different Outlaw with the taser special weapon instead of Outlaw from Twisted Metal Black. Yeah, I could go on for days about that. It's just weird to me that they did that. And my last point, the levels are really large, but some are just too large, which ends up slowing down the gameplay once you only have 4 or less enemies to fight. And that happens in the single player much too often. Don't get me wrong, and I'll talk about this in the things that I like about this game, that I do like the level design here. I think they did a really good job. They obviously put a lot of work into each level and the look of the levels and everything. But you gotta admit that there's just some that are way too large for their own good, that when you play on the full version of the level, it just becomes way too open and broad when you're going against, 5 or less characters. And that especially comes into apparent on multiplayer. If you only have like 4 or 5 friends and you go into a lobby together and you play on the full version of a level, sometimes it could take you like 2 minutes to find each other. It's that insane. I didn't expect this video to be that long. I guess I should have told you guys to get some popcorn at the beginning because we got a lot to go into when I talk about the things that I really like about this game. And believe it or not, I actually have more points to the stuff I like than the points I disliked. So getting into that, the level design is great. Yes, I know I said some of the levels are too big and they do hurt the gameplay in some certain situations, and that is true. But I will say that overall, I think they are really good levels. They have really good flow. I love the atmosphere on most of the levels in this game. They all, pretty much for the most part, feel really different from each other. Not too many of them feel too much of the same, except for Diesel City and Watkins Harbor. Those are the only two for me that really kind of blend together a little bit. But overall, All the other ones are really good, like especially Thrills and Spills is by far one of my favorite maps of all time in the Twisted Metal series, so I gotta give them credit for that alone. But yeah, I think the levels overall are really decent and probably one of the highlights of the game. I say this earlier, but the graphics are gorgeous in my opinion. I think this is one of the best looking games on the PS3 system, and I'm probably a little biased of course, but I do think this game looks still good to this day. And even when you're in some pretty hectic moments with a lot of stuff going on the screen, there's still a lot of times where I feel the game could have dropped in frames and really chugged along, and it somehow stays going. There obviously is some sections, especially during the boss battles in this game, where it does chug a little bit with the frame rate, but it's kind of one of those things like it's bound to happen, especially on a PS3 system running this kind of a game. You know, I expected it to be worse. The controls were honestly fine. If you're a Twisted Metal veteran, at least, I can understand if the controls for someone brand new who's never played Twisted Metal kind of confused them or made them irritated. And especially it was stupid in my opinion that they did not let you change up the control scheme at all. Yes, there was I think 2 or 3 already pre-made control schemes that you could switch between in the settings, but that was it. They don't let you customize them in any way, shape, or form, which they should have. That being said though, I'm glad that they stuck mostly to the same roots of the original controls of Twisted Metal, so I felt right at home and I had no issues whatsoever with it. The fast-paced gameplay, it made for some really amazing fun and chaotic moments. I mean, you can see it here in this video. This game is a hell of a fun time to play, even in 2023. Jumping into it against some bots on hard, I mean, you can have a really good time with it and just kind of mess around and go crazy. But I do feel with these levels, I really wish there would have been a way to go against like 15 to 20 enemies. I think it would have been perfect, just because you wanted to utilize that entire size of the level. But for what it is, even going against 10 enemies is still a really good time. The cars all feel and handle really great in their own ways, and most vehicles do feel quite different from one another, which I actually really prefer. It gives you more of a reason to choose one or the other. Like, should I go for one that's really easy to handle and has a really good speed, but pretty bad armor and an okay special weapon? Or should I go with someone who has really good ram damage, really good armor, but they're pretty sluggish? It really comes up to your playstyle and what you want to do. But I like that it really differentiates the characters from one another, when in the old games, yes, there was a lot of that, but it didn't feel nearly as prominent as it is here. When the online worked, it was incredibly fun, and of course if you had lobbies up to 16 players total going at it in a large-scale battle, it was just something to behold. And thankfully, online communities are trying to bring back the servers to their former glory as we speak, using programs such as Xlink to still have LAN parties, which work pretty good. And by the way, we are hosting our very first 2012 online community game night, which will be hosted in the Twisted Metal Federation Discord. So make sure to check out the description below if you'd like to join in on that sometime, because we'll be hosting them for many community game nights to come. Another really cool and unique thing is you could create custom paint jobs for every vehicle in the game, which I thought was pretty cool that you could show off your artistic skills with that. And if I remember right, I think they also showed up online as well, so you could go through and spend hours messing with different colors and different combinations of stuff for your vehicles. They even had a way where you could download the file of the map to your vehicle and put it on a computer and use it in Photoshop and then upload it to a website and then put it back into the game. Obviously, it'd be a lot easier nowadays to do that, but back then that was the only way they could do it, and it was still pretty dope. I had a lot of friends that went hardcore with the artistic stuff with their vehicles and created some really amazing masterpieces that it's just sad that they didn't really get to show it off too much because of the online shutting down. The cars overall, in my opinion, felt pretty balanced, and there was a large skill gap so that new players could pick certain vehicles like Darkside or Meatwagon that were pretty easy to understand and did decent damage right off the bat, while experienced players could choose the more difficult to understand characters such as Shadow or Axel, and they could master their multiple versions of their special weapons to do insane amounts of damage. So yeah, I really like that they had a pretty good skill gap in this game to learn a lot of techniques and different ways to go about the battle, which sadly didn't really get to see the light of day because I really think they were looking more towards the future and what this game could do. It could even become an esport at some point, I think, you know what I mean? If it would have taken off and did well, I really think it could have been as big as even Rocket League. But sadly, that's only a dream at this point. And as cheesy and dumb as the cutscenes in the single player are in this game, they had a unique style to them and a little bit of a charm that I really liked, and I wish we could have just gotten more from every character. It's really just a bummer we only got to see 3 characters show up in the storyline, but the fact that they were live action this time around and they had real actors playing them Yeah, I can understand why they only could afford 3. And my last point is, at least they did include single player modes like Deathmatch and Last Man Standing and a few other ones to give a little bit more life to the single player experience once you've finished the main storyline. And they also did include split screen co-op, which was an absolute blast to play with a friend. I did that many times back in the day when I had my original PS3, and me and my buddy actually played split screen co-op with Juggernaut in order to unlock Warthog. It was kind of a way to say fuck you for making Warthog so incredibly hard to unlock, but it was also just fun to play with a friend. The only downside is I just wish it had some type of online capability to do co-op. It's only split screen for some reason. But those are pretty much my main points I wanted to get across, to the things that I really dislike about this game and the reason why I feel it failed, but also to talk about the things I really love about 2012 and why I do think it should have had some type of remaster or at least been ported to the newer consoles so people of the newer generation, and of course people like us who loved this game, could go back and play it again without having the hassle of going and playing it on an old console. Because the PS3, as you guys may or may not know, is kind of a bitch to record gameplay with. There's a lot of hoops you gotta jump through, and PS3s are old hardware at this point, so they're starting to shut down. I had to swap out my hard drive in mine and put an SSD in it to get this footage for this video. So yeah, it really just goes to show that the PS3 has definitely seen its days, and I don't know. I just hope one day we can get some more love for Twisted Metal and bring these games back to their former glory. And I would love for a new one, of course, like everybody here watching this video. And I also would really love if they could just, I don't know, start doing remakes of these games. I would absolutely love that. But for what it is, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Why did you think this game failed? And what were the main reasons you liked this game? I really want to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Make sure to leave a like, share, support as always. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And we'll hopefully see you in the next one. Peace out. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end of the video. Before we head out, I want to give a huge special thank you to our channel members. These are amazing people who are wanting to support the channel and the content here. And if you want to do the same, you can click the little join button underneath every single new upload. And in becoming a channel member not only supports me and the channel, but also gives you a ton of perks in doing so, including early access to new content and being a part of exclusive polls and information that other people would not be able to access. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you again so much for the love and support, and we'll hopefully see you in the next one. Peace out.